If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Status quo bias. Hi, welcome to another episode of Unlocking Mind Behind Make More Work Less. My name is Fong. I'm an entrepreneur, business strategist, real estate investor, speaker, and also a best-selling author. And every single day, I help others unlock the potentials and guide them to succeed. Today on Unlocking the Mind, we talk about another cognitive bias. And the reason why I have this show is because we are able to better understand how our minds work, make better decisions, build better relationships, and sometimes avoid certain cognitive traps. So for today's cognitive bias, we're going to be talking about status quo bias. So what exactly is that? Well, I'm sure you all have heard all of that saying at the very beginning. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That is status quo bias. If you are going through so many things and nothing's ever been bad, why fix it? Why change it? Because us as human beings are so afraid of change. There is a saying out there that goes, people don't change until the pain of remaining the same is greater than the pain of change. And that's the only reason why we would actually change, because we don't want to still be in that same mode because it makes us even more painful. But that's the only reason why, because we have the status quo bias. And why is that? Because over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, it is there for us to be protected. We don't want to change anything if it worked, because way back in the caveman times, if we change the way we hunt, we might get killed. If we change and try something new, that new berry, it might actually kill us or poison us. And that's because we don't know what's out there. And that's why the status quo bias is there for our brains to protect our bodies. We don't want to face more risk. We don't want to face change if it's going to cause any problems. It's very similar to also the loss aversion bias as well, where our sense of loss is much, much greater than the sense of gain of that same amount. So for instance, if we lost $50, our sense of loss, that pain, is so much more greater than actually gaining $50. So the concept of, hey, if we change something, that might lead us to losing something, we're going to feel so much more loss if we actually go ahead with it. Rather than if we change something and if we gain something, then it actually doesn't compare to that sense of loss that potentially might happen. And that's why there's a status quo bias. So if you think about all the stuff you've done, all the investment stuff that you've done, all the habits that you've done, it's because of status quo bias. Let me ask you this question. What is your most favorite ice cream flavor? Well, vanilla or strawberry. But when that new flavor comes out and you go in there and say, wow, I'm adventurous, I want to try something new, you feel that sense of loss and going, wait a minute, if I pick this new thing, I will lose the opportunity to have something that I know is tried, tested, and true that I absolutely love. And absolutely, you go back to picking your favorite ice cream flavor. And that's because of that status quo bias once again. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it's not bad, why change it? There's a study being done before where, okay, if there was a lake out there and it was already polluted, people were already dumping stuff in there, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in and goes, you know what, we need to change this. We need to stop dumping chemicals in there. We need to start putting more pollution in there. And people were actually against that because they go, wait a minute, if it ain't broke, why are we changing it? If that's the way it's been for the longest time, why are we changing it? But if the same thing happened and that lake was completely clean, and then somebody comes in and goes, you know what, I'm going to start dumping all this stuff. They go, no, don't dump anything because it's the way it is. Don't change it. Why fix it? So therefore, that is status quo bias. There's this joke that goes around about status quo bias, and that goes a little something like this, where a mom was preparing a ham, and they got this ham, they cut the corners off, and they put it into the oven, and they serve it. And then the daughter comes up and goes, well, how come we cut the corners off? And then the mom goes, you know what, we've done this all the time. I just never changed it. But that's what my mother's taught me, and that's what her mother taught her, and so on and so on. So they've never changed it. Why fix it if it ain't broke? So the daughter actually goes and asks the grandmother, and then the grandmother goes, yeah, I don't know. I've been doing this all the time. It's been passed down from my mother and so on, and I just never change it. And then they go to the great grandmother, and the great grandmother actually said, well, that's because the pan I had was too small, and I always cut it off the sides so I can actually fit it into that pan. That is status quo bias. People didn't change just because it just never caused a problem. So how do we prevent ourselves from status quo bias? Well, number one is we need to seek the downside. If we change, if we don't change, what is the downside of not changing? That is the reason why so many people don't change their investment strategies, even though if we're losing, they don't actually go and look at the numbers and go, wait a minute, if I keep on doing this, I'm going to lose more and more and more versus if I actually change it. They're so stuck in that status quo bias of remaining with that same strategy that they don't want to change. So the thing is, if number one, we go and seek the downside, if we're not changing anything, we can actually compare the positives and negatives of both scenarios. So seek the downside. Number two is reverse that decision and ask yourself that question again. So for instance, let's say if you were given the opportunity of getting a raise of $10,000, but you had to move where you work, go to a different location. Would you do it? Most likely not. You would say, no, why? I like it the way I am. Even though if I do get that $10,000 raise, I'd rather stay where I'm at. So how to reverse that decision? By asking yourself, let's say if you were already living in that new location and you were given the opportunity to move back home, but you had to pay $10,000. You had to lose $10,000. Would you do it? And if the answer is no, well, you actually reverse the decision, you reverse the question, and you're able to see how it is going to be if you were approached it in a different way. And that takes out the status quo bias. And then final number three is you have to control your options. You have to control the choices that you have. If you limit it all down to a very minimal amount of choices, then you're able to actually compare apples to apples or numbers to numbers or pros and cons. So that's how you can avoid status quo bias. So that, again, status quo bias, what is it? Well, it's the thing where people don't want to change because they want to remain the same, because it's always worked and they don't want to change it just of the fear of what if something happened and they would lose something. So that is status quo bias. If you like this episode, please go back and watch some of my other episodes on unlocking the mind behind Make More Work Less. And if you like this show, we have a lot of other shows, the Mastermind Bites, the Peak Potential Success Show, and also the Make More Mind Bites that's up every single week. So thank you very much for watching, your subscriptions, your likes, your comments. I love seeing those comments. And until next time, today is the day to unlock your peak potential. We'll see you later.